Ruby suffered from PCOD, and there was a cyst in her uterus. Her husband used to sleep with her and make relation forcefully without caring the doctor's warning. On that unfaithful day, Ruby strongly refused to entertain him. As a result, he assaulted her so severely for 3 days that her entire body became wounded. Her daughter stood at the door, crying out to the neighbors to save her mother, but no one listened. Her 5-year-old son also tried to protect her, but his pleas went unheard. After 3 days of continuous abuse and beating, when he still wasn't satisfied, he attacked her private parts, punching her there. Come, let's know the full story of Ruby, a girl from India.
This is the story of Ruby Sardana. She belonged to a district named Madhya Pradesh, India. Ruby. Her story began when she was working far from home at a northeastern hospital in Gwalior. She was a nurse, living her life comfortably and managing everything on her own. One day, she met a man she didn't know, but he seemed familiar to her right from the start. He came from a good family, was quite wealthy, and had a successful career. What Ruby didn't know at that time was that he suffered from depression. He took Ruby to meet his family, who were just as pleasant as he seemed to be. His family suggested that they should get married. Ruby was aware that the man was divorced. His marriage had ended just 2.5 months earlier. She thought it might have been due to some issue with the girl or that things just didn't work out. The man seemed fine, and his family appeared to be supportive, so Ruby decided to overlook the fact that he was divorced. She thought maybe the previous marriage didn't work out due to the girl's fault, and she felt the man was still a good person. The man proposed marriage to Ruby, and being far from home, she considered it seriously. She wondered how long she would continue to live alone and whether it was time to settle down and have a family of her own. After all, how long could she continue to struggle on her own? So, she agreed to marry him. They got married, and life seemed to be going well. After 3 months, Ruby became pregnant, and everything was still fine. However, when she was 6 months pregnant, her husband's depression surfaced. This wasn't an ordinary case of depression, it turned Ruby's life upside down. She then discovered that this was not her husband's first episode of depression. He had been suffering from this illness since he was 16 years old. Ruby's husband had undergone treatments, including electric shocks, in various large hospitals, but she was unaware of this before their marriage. She didn't know that he had been receiving treatment for his condition. His income was not as stable as he had portrayed it to be. He had told Ruby that he was involved in manufacturing, which made it seem like he owned a factory. However, this was far from the truth. There was no such factory. Later, Ruby discovered that even the large house they lived in wasn't actually his own, as he didn't have the papers to prove ownership. His income wasn't good either, and although he owned a 4-wheeler, it had been purchased on a loan. Moreover, his mental condition was not stable. He was extremely lazy and didn't want to work. To make matters worse, Ruby found out that he was 12 years older than her. When they got married, he had told her that he was only 5 years older, but after their marriage, his mother revealed the truth about his age. Despite all these shocks, Ruby accepted her situation. She thought that since they were already married, she was pregnant, and they were going to have a child, she had no choice but to move forward and ignore these things. She hoped that once the baby was born, everything would improve. She believed that perhaps her husband would start working and that his mental condition would gradually improve as their family grew. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Things seemed to stabilize for a while, but then they would deteriorate again. This cycle continued, and before she knew it, 2 to 3 years had passed. Those 2 to 3 years were incredibly difficult for Ruby. She felt that her life had become worse than a living hell. She would see other families living happily, enjoying good food, wearing nice clothes, and living comfortable lives, while she struggled. Her daughter was growing up, and Ruby constantly felt the financial strain because her husband didn't work. He was a depression patient, and whenever he fell ill, there would be no source of income for the entire year. After a few more years, Ruby gave birth to a son. Things went well for 6 to 7 months after his birth, but then her husband's depression returned. In the 8 years of their marriage, her husband had gone through 4 episodes of severe depression. Ruby had no support from her family or in-laws. She had to manage everything on her own. Over time, the financial situation became increasingly difficult, and she started feeling the burden of it more and more. Eventually, she decided to start working herself. She began online reselling to make some extra money, which helped cover household expenses to some extent. However, her husband objected to her working. He would constantly question her about what she was doing on her phone, who her customers were, and which men she was talking to. These doubts filled his mind, and despite Ruby's attempts to ignore them and focus on earning, the arguments between them escalated day by day. Eventually, she quietly gave up the online work because the constant conflict became unbearable. But once again, the financial strain returned. Like anyone, Ruby knew the value of earning money, and it was disheartening not to have enough. She decided that if her husband wasn't going to earn, she needed to find a way to contribute more. Her mother-in-law, whom Ruby had cared for, had given her a necklace as a token of appreciation. This necklace had been lying around for a while, and Ruby thought about selling it to start her own cosmetics business. She believed that with a small investment, she could grow the business, and they would have some financial stability. Ruby opened a small cosmetics shop, hoping it would be the beginning of a better life for her family. However, after opening the shop, she faced unimaginable challenges that she hadn't anticipated. She began to regret her decision to start the business. She questioned herself, why had she even bothered to help her family and support her husband? Why had she thought she could walk side by side with him? For 6 months, she ran the shop continuously, traveling to Gwalior to buy stock. This meant returning home late at night, and her husband's suspicions only grew. He constantly questioned her about whom she was meeting in Gwalior, why she was coming home so late, and what she was doing there. These doubts and accusations hollowed Ruby out from the inside. Every morning, she would complete all the housework and take care of the children before heading to the shop. At the shop, Ruby spent her entire day arguing with customers and dealing with various issues. When she returned home exhausted in the evening, she would find the house in complete disarray. The sight of the mess irritated her, but despite her fatigue, she would clean up, cook, feed everyone, and put them to bed. This daily grind left her increasingly frustrated and irritable. To make matters worse, her relationship with her husband had deteriorated as well. He would expect intimacy at night, but Ruby, already drained from the day, had no desire for physical closeness. This led to frequent and intense arguments. Her refusal to be intimate fueled her husband's suspicions. He began accusing her of infidelity, claiming that she was involved with someone else, especially since she traveled to Gwalior for shop supplies. He questioned her about why boys were coming to her shop, buying things, and who she was constantly messaging on her phone. His baseless accusations escalated over time. He even went so far as to accuse her of having physical relationships with others, suggesting that she must have lovers or affairs because of her lack of interest in him. The tension continued to build day by day, and Ruby reached a breaking point. She couldn't endure it any longer. One day, in a fit of anger, she decided she could no longer live with him. Every time they fought, she would tell him that she wanted a divorce, that she couldn't stay with him anymore. But these words were spoken in the heat of the moment. If she had truly wanted a divorce, she would have left him the moment all these harsh truths came to light after their marriage. She could have easily walked away then, but she stayed, hoping to build a life together for the sake of their children. Despite all the challenges, Ruby tried to make a new beginning. She wanted to walk alongside her husband, step by step, but it seemed he didn't want the same. His depression only made things worse, leading to even more doubts and suspicions. Ruby felt suffocated by it all. She was a woman with self-respect, and society's outdated beliefs about women no longer held any weight for her. People still thought that once a woman was married, she had to stay with her husband through thick and thin, that she had to endure until old age, being the support for her husband and children. But that was the thinking of the past. Women of today were not so weak. They could achieve anything they set their minds to, especially for the sake of their children. Ruby was an educated woman with qualifications. She had worked as a nurse in Gwalior, was MSc qualified, held a computer diploma, and had experience in banking preparation. She had all the abilities to move forward in life. However, her husband's constant mistrust had hollowed her out. One day, in anger, she decided to return to her parental home. But as she prepared to leave, her husband refused to let her take the children with her. After Ruby reached her parental home, her husband spread rumors among everyone that she was a heartless mother who had abandoned her children. The very next day, Ruby received a call from an orphanage informing her that her husband had contacted them, wanting to place their children in the orphanage. Shocked and hurt, she immediately called him, telling him, "If you can't take care of our children, then give them to me. But as long as their grandmother is alive, my children will never go to an orphanage." However, her husband refused to listen. Days turned into weeks, and Ruby remained at her parental home for over a month and a half. During this time, her husband began making calls, spreading false allegations about her on social media. He claimed that his wife had run away from home, taking all the money, valuables, and jewelry, and that she was living at her parental home, having an illicit relationship with another man. These accusations devastated Ruby. She was staying with her brother, but the slander from her husband pierced her heart. She began to question why she should even return to her own home when her husband, with whom she had shared 8 years of her life, doubted her so deeply. If he didn't trust her, whom could she rely on? In the midst of all this turmoil, Ruby's brother tried to reason with her. He urged her to give her husband one more chance, and after much persuasion, she reluctantly agreed. Her husband also made many promises during this time, assuring her that he would never hit her again and that he would stop doubting her. Ruby returned to her husband's home, trusting his promises that things would change, that their relationship wouldn't deteriorate further, and that their children wouldn't have to suffer because of their differences. But as soon as she came back, within a day or two, the same nightmare began all over again: physical abuse, constant arguments, restrictions on everything she did, from watching TV to going out, using her phone, even controlling what she could eat. The level of control and boundaries imposed on her grew even more severe than before, making her life far worse than it had been earlier. Then, the fateful night came. Her husband beat her once again, this time because she had refused to be physically intimate with him. This beating wasn't a one-time event, he continued to assault her for 3 days straight. Her 2 children witnessed the horror, trying desperately to help their mother. Her daughter stood on the balcony, shouting for the neighbors to save her mother, but no one came to their aid. Her 5-year-old son also tried to protect her, but his cries went unheard. Ruby was completely defenseless. After 3 days of relentless abuse, her body gave up, she became numb, unable to feel anything anymore. Her husband, still unsatisfied after days of violence, took it a step further and attacked her private parts. He punched her without once asking why she had refused to be intimate with him. The reason Ruby had been avoiding physical intimacy with her husband was due to her health issues. She had been suffering from PCOD, polycystic ovarian disease, which had led to the development of cysts in her uterus. Her husband was well aware of her condition, which had been troubling her for the past 2 years. She had repeatedly asked him to help her get treatment, explaining that PCOD caused severe problems, including excessive bleeding, which lasted for 20 to 25 days each month, leaving her body extremely weak and irritable. Instead of understanding her situation, her husband only tortured her more. He dismissed her pleas, saying, "I don't care. I don't have money for your treatment. I'm a depression patient myself. How can I take care of you when I can't even take care of myself?" Despite Ruby offering to cover the expenses herself, her husband refused to let her seek treatment. His paranoia and distrust of her had reached such an extreme that he wouldn't take her to the doctor, nor would he allow her to go on her own. Days continued to pass in this manner. Then, he declared that he would not pay for her treatment. So, she decided to handle her treatment on her own. She managed her treatment for a month and a half, but then her husband flatly refused to continue her treatment, saying she should do whatever she needed to do. She then decided that if her husband was not understanding her situation, she had no reason to be physically intimate with him. If he was not fulfilling his marital duties, why should she fulfill hers? She wanted to move forward and be happy, but he did not understand this. He was putting a lot of pressure on her to be physically intimate, but she resisted. She also had to consider her own well-being. The doctor had warned her that if her PCOD was not treated properly, she could either lose her uterus or develop cancer. In such a situation, she had to make a decision. When her husband hit her, it was not as painful as when he shared with his friends that she was not physically intimate with him. In that situation, she felt helpless. His friends suggested that her wife might be having an affair or has a lover, which is why she is not physically intimate with him. These rumors spread through the community, relatives, and friends. The only thing people talked about was how his wife was not physically intimate with him. No one knew that the real issue was her PCOD problem. Her husband never informed anyone about this, and as a result, her life became a living hell. She then made the decision that she could no longer stay with her husband. When a husband does not respect his wife, and when he himself has tarnished her honor despite her not being at fault, it becomes unbearable. A woman's dignity is crucial, and when someone wants to bring her down, attacking her honor is often the first step. She felt more broken now than ever before after her husband publicly auctioned off her respect. With no means to stay with him, she found that there was no way to support him any longer. Her patience had run out completely. She returned to her parental home, leaving her husband behind. She decided that if her husband could not understand her, then she would not rely on him. She realized that staying with a man who did not understand or respect her was futile. She had supported him for 8 years, given him a place in society, and enhanced his reputation. Yet, he could not value her. She called her brother and went back to her parental home. Once there, her husband continued his torment. He called and made filthy accusations. He even reported to the police that his wife was missing and spread on social media that she was a wayward, immoral woman who had disappeared with her jewelry and money. He falsely claimed she was living with a lover. These accusations reached such a level that her brother was deeply troubled. He told her that her husband had gone too far and that it was enough. At that point, she had no way forward. She was lost between her parental home and her marital home. In such situations, people often resort to suicide or make wrong decisions, plagued by negative thoughts. She had those thoughts too, but with her 2 children in front of her, she realized she had to live for them. She couldn't afford to make a wrong decision. She was educated and capable of earning for her children's future. She wanted to ensure that her children wouldn't have to face the same struggles she did because of their father's actions. Her husband wanted to keep the children, but he had treated their mother so badly. She didn't want her children to learn from this experience. So, she decided to move forward for her children's sake. She found solace in her new home, feeling content and supported. She realized there were many opportunities and skills she could learn, which motivated her to advance. She knew she would stand on her own feet soon and be able to support her children. She had applied to several hospitals for nursing positions and hoped to receive an interview call soon. She was confident that she would soon be able to stand on her own and provide for her family. She hoped that her story would offer some lessons and insights, shedding light on the real-life challenges faced by many in Indian society. By sharing her story, she aimed to make people aware of how things really are in the world. You may share it with others.
Since you have reached here, shows you liked the story. Please share it with your friends who want to watch such real stories from Indian society. Also like and subscribe to get more like this. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Take care of yourself and your family.